Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our read-along of Frank Herbert's science fiction masterpiece, Dune. We've had a little bumpy start here, stops and starts, but that'll all iron itself out when I make one of my custom playlists. We're going chapter by chapter through this book. We are in part 2 of the book, which is titled Muad'Dib, and we are now picking up the pieces of the cataclysm that descended on House Atreides in the part 1 of this book, where the Duke himself was killed, and his household, his war masters, Thufir Hawat, Duncan Idaho, Gurney Halleck, his woman, the Lady Jessica, his son and heir, Paul, were scattered to the winds. And not only them, other people, as we're going to see, other people, like, for instance, the planetologist Kynes, also, that decision on the part of the Emperor to smuggle in legions of his killer soldiers, the Sardaukar, in order to help Baron Harkonnen overthrow House Atreides, that is going to have ripples far and wide. And since that decision throws Paul Atreides onto the bare, flat surface of Dune, of the deserts of Arrakis, where he will be saturated with spice, you could easily say that that decision shapes human history for thousands of years to come. Not in this book, but still, the shaping in this book is pretty profound. But in order to get to that shaping, we, in this part of the book, have to deal with all of those scattered pieces. We watched Paul and Jessica escape their captors and commandeer a thopter, a bug-winged helicopter, and fly it almost directly into one of Dune's legendary marauding sandstorms that can destroy metal, that can strip flesh from bone and chip bone. Nothing survives such a storm, and they seem, by their Harkonnen pursuers, to fly right into it. They don't die because Paul has an expert ability maneuvering his thopter. He's able to play with the storm and ride it out a bit and get them into a controlled landing onto the sand. So the storm doesn't kill them, and it passes on, and they take shelter from it under the sand and wait for it to go. Then they find themselves alone in the desert. They have some water. They have Fremen-made still suits that reclaim your body's moisture. They have a little bit of equipment, but not much. But they know a couple of things. Some Fremen have been alerted to their presence and to their plight. It's possible they might meet some people. Not likely that they would meet such people before they would meet Harkonnen patrols, but possible. And they also know that Fremen can survive in this same area, these same conditions. So theoretically, it should be possible for them to find enough food, enough water, enough shelter, safety from the giant worms that patrol the sands of Dune, to survive themselves, at least long enough to face tomorrow. That's the point that we're at in this novel, is that none of these characters are planning long-term anymore. Paul says that he is, but he's not. He can't be. He doesn't know where he's going to be tomorrow. We are looking at the scattered fragments of the first book. And that's all that the chapter that we're reading today is. Paul and Jessica land on the sand. They have to flee from their craft. They're worried about worms at all times. They see a couple of worms. They have to run from a couple of worms. At one point, Jessica falls and is buried in sand. Paul has to dig her out. It's all very small-scale drama. They talk, but not about much of anything. Nothing really happens to them except the mishaps of floundering around in the desert when they don't yet really know what they're doing. To me, the most notable part of the chapter was a typo, because I mentioned before that due to old newspaper instincts, I simply cannot ignore typos. I simply cannot. Paul led the way down, moving cautiously but hurrying towards the obvious. It was obvious the moonlight could not last much longer. They wound down into the world, deeper and deeper shadows. Hints of rock shape climbed to the stars around them. The fissures narrowed to some 10 meters at the bank of a dim gray sand slope that slanted downward into darkness. "Can we go down?" Jessica whispered. "I think so." He tested the surface with one foot, but the text says, "Can we do down?" And I don't even remember circling that. When I encounter a typo like that, I go into automatic mode and I circle it with whatever's nearby. And I have no idea. I have not checked. I have many, many, many copies of Dune. I have not checked to see if anyone's ever fixed that. It's kind of amazing from the mid 1960s that it got there at all. We're so accustomed to typos in all of our books now. Once upon a time, though, it was a matter of pride and severe professionalism that could get someone severely reprimanded or fired. But anyway, that's all that this chapter is. Nothing happens really in it except that we learn a little bit more of the dynamics of Paul and Jessica. But those dynamics have radically changed. First of all, we knew very little about those dynamics beforehand. And those dynamics are going to radically change in just a couple of chapters. So if you, in every chapter of every book, you want to ask, in every chapter of every book written before the 21st century, you have to ask yourself, what is the author trying to accomplish with this chapter? Not with this book, not with this theme, but just with this chapter. A chapter is a dramatic entity on its own. What is the author trying to accomplish here? I think probably it's twofold. One is to show us how desperate things are. Paul Atreides, for good or ill, is our hero in this book. He's not heroic, he's not likable, but he's our hero in this book, him and Jessica. Part of the goal of this chapter is to show us just how desperate their plight is. That what used to be measured in terms of family atomics and guild spaceships and gigantic squads of armed men is now measured in how many jugs of water do we have in the desert. And the other import of this chapter, I guess, maybe would be to show that Paul is not yet completely in control of himself. He's not yet completely a man. Which, again, is going to seem very foreign in the 21st century, where you mark your entrance to adult manhood by losing your ability to control yourself. And no adults control themselves anymore. So children do, because they have to, or they'll have their drug supply cut off, or they'll get beaten. But adults, no. When's the last time you saw an adult control himself in public? But I guess that's the point of this chapter, is to show us a little of their dynamic, to show how desperate they are, to show how Paul still has growing to do. It's, I hate to say, a make-weight chapter. You hate to say that with an author as good as Frank Herbert. But there isn't much to talk about here, so we've resumed Dune. We're going to move on to the next one. The next chapter is far meatier, so we'll have a lot more to talk about then. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, BookTube.